Listen, Disciple, if you've got a problem you can't handle, then I'm the one for the job. But if you're looking for prayer, you'd better find some other sister.
Sup, boys? So rather than do the same old song and dance that we've been doing for these character overviews, I'm actually just gonna kind of stay away from like going over talents and constellations and things like that. While the original intent for those videos were to introduce the character to you guys, I feel like that stuff is easily accessible and most people skip over that information anyways. They want to just get right down to how to build Rosaria. So that's kind of what we're going to be going over today. Now, we're not actually going to go over specific teams that you can build. I am going to save that for a video for next week, and we will go over those once I get a little bit more time with Rosaria and try some different things out. Do keep in mind that a lot of the information is still pretty fresh, even though she has been out for a couple of days now. Some things may shift one way or the other based on, you know, things that come up whenever people do more testing. So I did find this flowchart that was on Discord in the Rosaria mains Discord. I will actually leave a link to that Discord down in the description. It has a ton of good information. There's a ton of people that are very interested in making Rosaria the best that she can possibly be. There's a ton of fans of Rosaria and a ton of theory crafters that just want to see Rosaria excel. If you're interested in joining that, definitely go check that out. I have actually been putting a ton of effort into my members videos lately. I have been producing a lot of content exclusively for members. Just know that as a 5-star member, you do get those videos completely ad-free, and you get all the stuff that the previous tiers like 4 stars and 3 stars also get. Quick shout out if you're into that kind of thing. So our first stop is going to be taking a look at Rosaria as a sub-DPS. Now, there aren't too many stipulations for getting to this spot. Basically, you just don't want to use her as the main DPS of your team while everything else is on cooldown. You just want to swap into her, use her elemental skill, use her elemental burst, swap right back out, and do the main bulk of your damage with someone else. Staff of Homa is probably going to be the best option to go with. Primordial Jade Wingspear not far behind, and then Skyward Spine also does make up some good ground as well, being a really good 5-star spear. Now, if you have had the chance to purchase the Black Cliff Pole from the shop, depending on how long you've been playing, this is sort of like a free-to-play option, just as you've amassed enough Star Glitter, Stardust, whichever one it is, and you end up purchasing the Black Cliff Pole. It actually does perform really well on her. Lithic Spear also does really good. Now, she is not going to get the full 4 stacks from this spear because Rosaria herself doesn't hail from leeway, but with 3 stacks, it actually does perform pretty well either way. So definitely consider that if you do have one. Favonius Lance also works really well. Prototype Star Glitter, completely free to play option, and even White Tassel if you need to put something on her in the meantime while you're working on another weapon or something like that. White Tassel also pretty good here. Now, as that sub DPS role, when it comes to your artifacts, pretty much the best of the best here. We don't necessarily care that she is on the field all the time, so doing extra damage while off the field is kind of the benefit here. Noblesse makes a ton of sense for that scenario, so a 2-piece doing extra elemental burst damage and a 4-piece giving you extra attack for your party members. Make sure you don't have 2 4 sets on the same team because you're just kind of wasting an extra 2-piece bonus somewhere else. If you don't have a 4-piece Noblesse user on your team, definitely go with that on your Rosaria. Otherwise, you could go with a 2-piece of the Noblesse and a 2-piece of the Blizzard Strayer to give her extra cryo damage for her burst and her elemental skill as well. Another interesting thing that you could do is, I don't even know where this set is listed. You could go with the Berserker set. Now, this is kind of interesting and it's a little weird, but level with me here. The Berserker set could actually be used if you are just going to abuse the fact that Rosaria can actually give crit rate to her teammates. So it's capped at 15%, which means that you're basically only going to be able to give 15% maximum to your teammates. You basically are wasting any more potential if you have over 100% crit rate. Give as much crit rate as you can to her if this is your ultimate goal, and the Berserker set is a really easy way to do that. So that's something else to consider if you already have a 4-piece Noblesse user on your team. Now, when it comes to your stats on these last 3 pieces, typically we would want to go with something like energy recharge or maybe attack percent on your timepiece. It really depends on how energy deficient your team feels. Obviously, if you're using like a Favonius Lance, then energy recharge may be a little bit overkill here, or if you have a ton of good energy recharge substats in your other pieces, then maybe energy recharge would still be overkill and you want to go for attack percents. This will heavily depend on how you end up feeling that Rosaria should, how often she should be using her burst. If you feel like it should be more often, then maybe you want to go with energy recharge here. If you feel like you already have it up whenever it's coming off a cooldown, and then maybe you want to put it into attack percent. Kind of depends on how you feel like playing. On our goblet, since we are sub DPS and we're not trying to do a whole lot of damage with our actual polearm, we're just doing it with our elemental skill and our elemental burst. Cryo damage makes a ton of sense here, pretty self-explanatory. And then we have our circlet. So this kind of goes back to the case for Berserker set. If you want to pump her full of crit rate so that you can give your other characters crit rate as well, then crit rate may actually make some sense on your circlet. If you don't like that style of gameplay and you just want to let her do some extra damage, then maybe crit damage makes some more sense for you. It really will depend on how you feel like playing her. I actually kind of like the Berserker idea. I think it's kind of unique and pretty cool. Now, as far as your substats go, there are a couple of different tweaks that you could go if you want to try to min-max her. Obviously, crit rate is going to be pretty important here. Crit damage is going to be pretty important. Those are always, you know, pretty big stats in general. Attack percent, of course. One thing I do want to point out, though, is don't forget about elemental mastery. Now, it's not going to make sense for everybody here, but if you are trying to use her in sort of like a reverse melt kind of comp, because the way that her skill and her burst work, as they are hitting, they have no internal cooldown. If you're kind of confused about that, I did an entire series of videos about this whole system. I highly encourage you to check that out. But basically, there's no ICD on her skill or her burst. So as every time that they hit or they tick, depending on which one you're using, they are going to proc a cryo application there, which is actually really cool, which means that even on a basic pyro aura, you're going to remove half of that pyro aura with both her hits on her elemental skill, which means that you can reverse double melt, which is really cool. And if you're going for that, then elemental mastery actually does make some sense here. Otherwise, kind of don't worry about elemental mastery. It doesn't really make a ton of sense outside of that specific case. Now, because in this scenario, we are going straight for sub DPS, we don't really necessarily care about our normal attack. Our burst definitely does make a ton of sense to level up first. I don't know why it always freezes right there. Our burst makes a ton of sense because that's going to be a huge chunk of our damage here. And then our elemental skill, of course, makes a ton of sense as well because we're just going to be swapping, using that, getting some energy, using our elemental burst, blah, blah, blah. Like I said, normal attack doesn't really do a whole lot for us in this specific scenario. We would want to definitely power that up if we plan on using her in a different role. So let's go ahead and talk about those. Physical Rosaria. I think this is probably going to be one of the more heavily debated builds versus the cryo build. I initially just saw Rosaria as a physical DPS. I thought that she was just going to be a physical polearm user, but she actually does have a pretty strong foothold on Cryo DPS as well, but it kind of takes some setup to get there. So let's more so talk about the physical side of Rosaria. What we're going to be doing is on our flowchart, if you remember, in this scenario, we are going to be using Rosaria as a main DPS. So the first question that our flowchart asks us is, do we have access to Chongyun? Yes or no, you could still end up going for physical build. Typically though, the big question for do you want to build physical is, do you have access to Sing Shou? So basically, physical DPS can be split up into two different sections, and it really comes down to how you end up doing your artifacts. So let's go over weapons first so we don't skip that, and then we'll get into the artifact selection here. So as a physical DPS, the top choice is going to be a Crescent Pike. If you have it at refinement level 5, if you are somehow just god lucky and you got some prototypes, I'd like some. It's actually really freaking good. It's really good, especially at refinement level 5. It actually can outperform some of the 5 stars. But if you don't have refinement level 5, refinement level 2 is still really freaking good. That's currently what I have, and it's actually really good. Staff of Homa, the typical stuff here: Staff of Homa, Primordial Jade Wing Spear. Even the Dragonspine Spear can actually do pretty good. The biggest reason that I don't recommend using Dragonspine Spear over Crescent Pike a lot of the times, it has a higher base attack with a lower additional bonus, which ends up giving you more attack to do things with your other stuff, whereas Dragonspine Spear has a lower base attack with a higher bonus, so it ends up kind of pigeonholing you into this one specific trick. While it can put up decent numbers, it kind of sticks you in this path and leaves you in it, and it doesn't really give you a whole lot of wiggle room with your other skills that aren't physical based. Deathmatch actually makes a ton of sense here. Skyward Spine actually should get some mention. The Halberd actually as a very good free-to-play option, and even the White Tassel as a really good free-to-play option as well. Now, when it comes to these artifacts, here's kind of where you may want to differentiate a little bit, okay? If you have access to Sing Shu, you could make a case to go for a physical Rosaria with Blizzard Strayer. The reason for this is because with Sing Shu, you could end up freezing the opponent and you can end up getting this full benefit from the 4-piece. That is pretty much the only reason that you would want to go with the Blizzard Strayer. So if you don't have Sing Shu at all, then it kind of makes more sense to go full physical here. So 4-piece Gladiator works really, really freaking good because we are pole arm user. It makes this just really freaking good. Even a full 4-piece of Bloodstained Chivalry actually makes some good sense here. Increasing your charge attack damage by 50%, reducing its stamina to 0 is actually really good. Or if you actually wanted to interchange Bloodstained with Gladiators, you could do a 2-piece of both. It also works really well there. And when it comes to your stats on these pieces, you would definitely want to have attack percent on your timepiece, definitely want to have physical damage on your goblet, and definitely want to have either crit rate or crit damage depending on what you're working with. If you are going with the Blizzard Strayer set, of course you don't need as much crit rate because there is so much crit rate innately built into this 4-piece set bonus. So crit damage makes a lot of sense here, especially if you are running a second cryo unit on your team with that resonance. You're going to get a ton of crit rate, and you don't really have to worry about her crit rate in the artifacts. You can just go full crit damage. Another interesting one that I feel like some people may not, immediately think of, the Martial Artist set actually does make a lot of sense here, increasing normal and charged attack damage by 15%. And after using an elemental skill for your 4-piece, it increases your normal and charged attack damage by 25% for 8 seconds. So this is actually pretty interesting. And because it's only 4-star pieces, I feel like this isn't like best case scenario that you should be going, because you're going to be missing out on a little bit of that, plus 16 to plus 20 range of stats. You are going to miss out on some of that. But, it's still a really interesting set and probably could be really good for a set to get into one of the other sets that we've already talked about. Typical substat stuff applies here as well, by the way. Just crit rate, crit damage, of course, depending on which scenario you're in. Of course, crit damage could be heavy weighted in those two. Attack percents, energy recharges, anything like that are going to be really, really good here. Now, on our talent side of things here, of course, because we are going to be using our normal attack a lot, we definitely want to be doing that on the field as a main DPS a ton. So definitely focus on your normal attack first. It's probably going to be the most important thing. And then burst and skill, in my opinion, could kind of go in tandem if you wanted to pick one over the other. Like if you had the materials to only do one versus the other, maybe you'd want to go with your elemental burst first. Depending on how much energy recharge you have, you probably would want to go with your elemental skill. In my opinion, I feel like I would be able to use my elemental skill more often, but based on the multipliers, pretty sure mathematically this works out to be a little bit more damage over time. So you probably want to go with your elemental burst long run. The last build on this flowchart that we really need to talk about utilizes two things: Sing Shu and Chongyun. So this is a full cryo infusion comp where you basically are going to abuse the fact that Chongyun is going to make all of our normal attacks over to cryo damage, and then Sing Shu is going to basically allow us to permafreeze everything. So top contenders for weapons, I mean, the typical 5-star stuff. Staff of Homa. Vortex Vanquisher works really good here if you're shielded. Primordial Jade Wing Spear, of course. Blackcliff Pole actually does do some pretty good stuff here. Lithic Spear with 3 stacks actually does really good. Deathmatch is kind of controversial in this slot because we do have so much crit rate. You could actually be going over on your crit rate if you're not careful with your substats and stuff like that. So be wary of using Deathmatch if you just have a ton of solid crit damage substat rolls, then this is going to be a really solid option. But if you have a lot of crit rate substat rolls, then you might end up wasting some of that crit rate because of how much just crit rate is going to be packed into this kit. It's insane. And then also Halberd and White Tassel, of course, are free-to-play options that are really, really good here. Now, for your artifacts, this one's going to be pretty clean cut and dry. The best possible situation here is going to be with a full 4-piece of Blizzard Strayer. Not only do we get the cryo damage bonus, but all this crit rate that we've baked into this is going to be sweet, especially since we have Chong Yun on the team. For that resonance, we are going to have a ton of crit rate built in here. So because of her Ascension 2 talent, Regina Probla, when she strikes an opponent from behind using her elemental skill, it increases her crit rate by 12% for 5 seconds, so that's 12%. Cryo resonance is 15%, and then this 4-piece is going to be 40%. That's 67% crit rate right there. And the deathmatch is going to give you something like 33% like that at top, like at level 90. Like, it's insane how much you're going to get out of that freaking weapon. So be very, very wary of your substat rolls. If you already have decent substats, then you probably don't need to go with deathmatch, but deathmatch obviously is a viable option here. Just be very wary because you don't want to go over that 100% crit rate mark, because literally everything after that is wasted. Now, if for whatever reason you don't want to go with Blizzard Strayer, maybe you just don't have any farmed up or anything like that, some other possible situations are 4-piece Gladiators works really well here, or if you want to mix and match those two, 2-piece Blizzard Strayer and 2-piece Gladiators Finale, those two work really well. And also a callback to the Martial Artist set that we talked about earlier. I definitely think that could work here as well. Now, for the stats on these beasts, you would definitely want to go with attack percent here, cryo damage here, and crit damage here. Don't even consider crit rate unless for whatever reason you may just don't have a weapon that allows you. Nah, definitely could just do crit damage. Just do crit damage. And then as far as your substats, of course, the typical stuff will apply as well. Crit damage, of course, any crit damage rolls that you can get are really good. Attack percent rolls, energy recharge, flat attacks, stuff like that. Crit rate is, again, controversial because you don't want to go over, but as long as you don't go over that 100%, any kind of crit rate substat rolls are perfectly fine. Now, of course, because we are going for the main DPS role here, normal attack makes a ton of sense. And then, of course, after that, you know, the same stuff applies that we've previously talked about. You know, whether you want to go with either one of these is up to you. Personally, you'll use your elemental skill a lot more often than your elemental burst, but your elemental burst will do more damage over time. So depending on how you feel like playing, that's going to be up to you, whichever one you want to do. Personally, I feel like I would use my elemental skill more. That's just the way that I play, though. All right, boys, that is 4. That's technically 4 different situations to enable your Rosaria to excel, whether you are using her as a sub DPS or a main DPS. You can kind of do a bunch of different things with her, which is really, really interesting. Like I did say at the beginning of this video, we are going to go over teams in a separate video once I get, you know, my hands on some different things. Lately, I've been using her with Beto, Zhongli, and trying out some geo-resonance stuff, just as some interesting things to do. Again, I do want to call out that if you guys want to be a member, that would actually be pretty cool. No pressure, of course. It is just purely to help support me, and I want to try to give back to those that support me. I'm typically like give it all out because, you know, like I don't want to put anything behind a paywall, but honestly, the things that I'm doing on the member side of things are just supplemental. It's just me being stupid and me playing around in different situations. I did actually do the summoning video for Rosaria as a members only video just to kind of give back to those people a little bit. But yeah, if you're interested in joining, there's a link in the description, and you can just hit join on the channel page or anything like that. It's basically like being a Patreon. It's pretty much the exact same thing. But anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and head out, boys. I'm gonna go do some more testing with Rosaria, and hopefully you guys have had fun using her. If you are on the fence about getting her, honestly, she's a 4-star. She's gonna be in the general pool, hopefully. They keep putting Diona in the banners, so I'm assuming that Rosaria is gonna keep coming back in the banners as a 4-star anyways. So don't feel too pressured to get her now. She won't be insanely hard to get later. I know you boys like them big old goth titties. Love you. Bye.